International Space Development Conference. Man, I haven't played like this already after being out of town last night. Man, just make it in here bright-eyed and ready to go again. Oh, that's how you did it. I thought you stayed up all weekend, I tell you. What, did you have fun? Yeah! All right. Thank you. Actually, NSS headquarters sponsored the one last night. I thought they did quite well. Ladies and gentlemen, you know our theme we've stated many times is found in the future. And the future's got a lot of dreams. And we've got a speaker here this morning who's got a real grand vision. Dr. Robert Zubrin is a senior engineer for the Denver Aerospace Division of the Martin Marietta Corporation. He has been researching and promoting direct flights to Mars using heavy lift launch vehicles for the trip out and nuclear reactors to power the generation of power and fuel for the trip back. Dr. Zubrin's come up with a lot of advanced concepts. You've probably seen him at some of the other ISDCs in the past. And also he'll be speaking at the AIAA Awards Banquet tomorrow night. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bob Zubrin.
So I'm Robert Zubrin, and as Greg said, I'm an engineer at Martin Marietta. And I'm going to talk to you about how humans can explore and begin the settlement of Mars in our lifetime. But before I do that, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about how human beings have been able to explore the Earth in order to put things in a little bit of context. Next slide. Okay. This is one of the great ships in the history of human exploration of the Earth. Now, she doesn't look like what you would call a great ship. Look at her size. You can see the two people standing next to her. Cut off her mast and bowsprit, you can put this ship inside the Space Shuttle payload bay. Completely. And yet this is one of the great ships in the history of human exploration. This is the Iowa. This is the ship that Captain Allison used to do his first successful voyage to the Northwest Passage. Now, this mission was, in many respects, a lot like an initial piloted expedition to Mars. It was 3 years in duration, which is comparable in length to what we might have on a first human expedition to Mars. The crew was a crew of 6, not 60, not 606, okay, which is comparable in size that you might expect to have on early piloted missions to Mars. The accommodations in the Iowa, I mean, for about 6 months of each of the 3 years they were in the Arctic, the crew had to live below decks on the Iowa, within a confined space, a lot smaller than a space station module, a lot smaller than actually the amount of volume per person prescribed by NASA standard 2000. And they were able to deal with the human factors challenges associated with this sort of confinement and duration and so forth. And it was successful. Next slide. Well, what of it? Okay, this was the first penetration of the Northwest Passage, successful, but it was by no means the first attempt. There had been over 100 previous attempts, all failures. In the 19th century alone, the British Navy tried 30 times. And every single one of those naval expeditions was done on a scale at least an order of magnitude, and in some cases 2 orders of magnitude greater in terms of men, material, and cost than the Amundsen expedition. These were very serious affairs with a lot of government money behind them. They were done with flotillas of steam-powered warships, supported by squadrons of fly vessels, pre-establishing depots in advance beforehand. The entire panoply of planning apparatuses of the governments were involved. They would go in there with a flotilla of warships, and they'd steam forward, breaking ice until they could make no further progress and be frozen in for the winter. and then they would eat their way into some of their several hundred tons of salt pork that they had brought with them. And then in the spring, if they were fortunate, they would break out and make further progress, and then get frozen in again and winter over again. And this would go on until the supplies got so thin that a retreat would be called for, and they would attempt to break out and get home. In most cases, actually successfully getting out to get home, but in no case doing the Northwest Passage. Amundsen was frozen in for 2 years on King William Island, which is the exact same island shown here in the Canadian Arctic that Sir John Franklin and his 2 steam frigates and 127 men were frozen in on in 1847. Now, the Franklin expedition perished to the man. Okay? They ate their way through their 300 tons of salt pork. They were still frozen in after 2 years. They couldn't break out, so they tried to escape overland to the south, but they couldn't do it. They had no mobility, and they dropped in their tracks, man-hauling sledges. And in fact, many of you may remember that just a few years ago, a number of Franklin's men were actually dug out of the ice, together with several crates of very fine Victorian china. Now, as I said, Amundsen was frozen in the same place, and for a longer period of time than it took the Franklin crew to disintegrate. But they did not starve while they were on King William. In fact, they gained weight. It's literally true. They got fat while they were on King William, eating caribou, which abound in the area. Okay? Because Amundsen did not go into the Arctic with 200 tons of salt pork. He couldn't. His expedition actually was funded on private money. It had to be a pork-free mission. They went in there with a couple of cases of hunting rifles and ammunition, and men who knew how to use them. And something else, they brought dogs and dog sleds, and men who knew how to use them. And dogs are essential to give you the mobility that is required to effectively hunt the highly mobile herds of caribou. And this combination, of course the dogs could be fed off the same resource. This combination not only allowed Amundsen to survive and do the Northwest Passage, but even do fundamental extensive exploration while he was in the Arctic. That is, instead of sitting on the decks of the Yoa staring at the ice praying it would break up for 2 years, what they did while they were frozen in was roam all over the Arctic, hundreds and hundreds of miles traveling by dog sled, which even allowed them to make a fundamental geophysical discovery, which was that the Earth's magnetic poles move. That was an important scientific discovery, and it was made by Amundsen, and it was only possible because of the capability in the Arctic environment that this approach to exploration gave him. So the moral of the story is that if you look at the history of human exploration of the Earth, it has been repeatedly shown that it is possible for a small group of people operating on essentially a shoestring budget to succeed brilliantly when numerous others with vastly greater resources behind them have repeatedly failed, provided that the small shoestring group makes effective use of the resources that are available in the environment they intend to operate in. Okay? That's the story of Amundsen, it's the story of Lewis and Clark. You can go down the list. Okay? So, how does this relate to space? Next slide. Okay, on to Mars. 1989, President Bush got up in front of the National Air and Space Museum with Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins, the Apollo 11 crew, and Bush said, look, this is the 20th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. That was great. That was what America's all about. And therefore, I, as the president, am committing us to go back to the moon and on to Mars, and this time to stay. Great. So he announces the Space Exploration Initiative, right? Okay. So what happens next? NASA goes off and it conducts a study on how this might be accomplished. Okay, and they come back 3 months later with a report, which of course came to be known as the 90-day report. And they said, look, we can do it. We can get you there. Okay, it's going to take 30 years before we're ready to fly, and it'll cost you $300 to $400 billion. But we can do it. And so what they came out with was concepts similar to this. And because I'm going to say uncomplimentary things about this vehicle, and it is a concept of a competing company, I will just admit right now that at various times in the past, Martin Marietta has come up with concepts equally unattractive. So I'm not trying to make hay about this, but this is a very fine drawing of the kind of thinking that was in the 90-day report, and that's why I use it. Okay. What you have here is a interplanetary spaceship. Okay. It is about 100 meters long as a football field. It has 5 tanks of liquid hydrogen, each with about 120 tons of liquid hydrogen in it. So each one would have to be launched by a separate heavy lift vehicle in the Saturn V class. That would take about a year, during which time a lot of that stuff would be boiling off. But okay. You got two nuclear engines there in the back, each with 75,000 pounds of thrust, so that there's as much force on that truss as a truss standing vertically on the earth with a platform with 75 cars sitting on it. Okay, pushing straight down. All that's got to be built in space, and all the electrical wiring and cryogenic feed lines and so forth, all the plumbing, all's got to be put together in space all along that truss and all that stuff. There's the lander is up front, and there's the big aeroshell, which is too big to be lifted inside the fairing of any launch vehicle, so it would have to be assembled on orbit and checked out on orbit with all the integrity that is required of an aeroshell that's going to do an atmospheric entry and take that kind of heat loads and so on. And next slide. And it can all be put together in 10 easy steps. As depicted here. And what is required to put together in 10 easy steps is essentially an entire parallel universe of orbital infrastructure, including space stations, hangars, on-orbit checkout spots, on-orbit cryogenic depots, assembly shops, etc. This is not necessarily all impossible, but it is pretty hard. And we looked at this stuff at Martin, and when it came out, and said, look, this isn't going to fly. There's a lot of technical problems with this that would probably make it not fly, but even beyond them, there is the overall political fact that this is a dead loss from the word go. That is, it is absurd to think that it's going to be possible to get $400 billion spent over 30 years to get someone to launch a program of this nature to eventually get to Mars. And that unless somebody comes up with a more practical and more straightforward approach to accomplishing the human exploration of Mars, nothing like this is ever going to happen. So we put together a team at Martin called the Scenario Development Team, and we convinced our management that we should be allowed to take a clean sheet approach, where no manager or marketeer or somebody like this would come in and tell us, look, you got to design the mission this way, because we know this guy down at some NASA center somewhere who's pushing this particular technology, and he'd really like to see it in the mission. Yes, the problem with the 90-day report wasn't that the people who did it were dumb. They were not dumb. There were very many fine people involved in that study. The problem was the political factors that were driving it to include as basically the entire wish list of technologies that NASA hoped to get funded, either in the present or in the future. So that what was going on was there was a political imperative that was driving them to design the most complex mission you possibly could, which is exactly the opposite of how you want to do engineering. The way you do engineering is by designing things as simple as they possibly can be, using the least number of critical technologies as you possibly can. Okay, so that was going on. So we put together this approach, and we called it Mars Direct. And actually, the very first place it was ever shown to any people in the closed group was right here in Huntsville in April of 1990. And the first place it was ever shown publicly to an open people was the National Space Assembly Convention in Memorial Day, 1990, Anaheim. Okay? But this approach, which I'm about to describe you, immediately caused shockwaves everywhere. Okay? Because what we're able to do will show that it is possible to do a manned Mars mission, piloted Mars mission, with present-day technology without invoking a parallel universe. Okay? That we can do it in our own universe. Okay? And we can do it with just 2 launches of a heavy lift vehicle, with no on-orbit assembly, with in fact no orbital rendezvous of any kind. Okay? And basically, there's absolutely no reason why we can't do this mission, why it has to be postponed to the people of the future. Okay? So, without further introduction, one more point. Okay? Yeah, I'll have to make one more point, then I'll say without further introduction. If you want to get to Mars, there's something you got to realize. Next slide. Okay? That this is the strategic position of your program. Okay? Okay? That is, if you get a miracle and someone announces, as Bush did in 1989, I am now committing us to launch a program to go to Mars, and the waters have parted for you, you cannot cross this on a 30-year timeline. Because those waters will come together again. Okay? God will do amazing things, but He really doesn't have infinite patience. You got to move. Because, just, to be clear, the political conditions that allow you to begin a program will not persist forever. Now, exactly how much time you have is unclear, but if you want to cross, you got to go. Okay? And I am absolutely convinced that if John F. Kennedy had said, I want to put a man on the moon by 1990 instead of by 1970, we never would have made it. Never would have made it, because by 1968, when administrations changed, we would have been in the Vietnam War and somewhere in the middle of the Mercury program. And Apollo would be well in the future, and they would say, well, this is costing too much, we're not getting anywhere, let's cancel this thing. And we still wouldn't have made it to the moon, and the moon would still be an impossible dream. Okay? So, if you want to go to Mars, you cannot do it in 30 years. You have to do it in 10 years, or less. Okay? And the less, the better. Okay? That's the only way to do it. So in designing the mission, you've got to design it that way. Okay? And that's how we attempted to do this. So now, without further introductory comments, next slide. Here's how it works. Okay? Any space transportation system's got to have a launch vehicle. We designed one. Okay, called an Ares. It's a Saturn V substitute using shuttle technology. It uses a shuttle external tank as its core, but without the ogive, which is the pointy cone on top of the ET today. Got 4 space shuttle main engines and a pod there on the bottom. And those engines, by the way, are available free from the Rocketdyne Company if you go at night, because they have laid off the night watchman. And then there's 2 shuttle solids there, which are available in Utah. You probably have to pay for them. And then finally a hydrogen oxygen upper stage with about 250,000 pounds of thrust, the same as was in the S4B stage of Saturn V that threw the payloads to the moon. Now, Ares can lift 120 tons to LEO, which is more than an Energia and less than a Saturn V. It's in that general class. But actually, more importantly, because it is a staged vehicle, it can use its upper stage to throw payloads far beyond LEO. In particular, it can throw 47 metric tons to Mars, direct, or 59 to the moon. And you see, that's how we want to do a Mars mission. We want to do a Mars mission by using the upper stage of the same booster that lifted the payload to low Earth orbit. That is the way every real interplanetary mission to date has ever been flown. That is the way, of course, the Apollo missions got to the moon. No one has ever flown a lunar or interplanetary mission by lifting payloads to orbit, where they were transferred to the hangar of an orbiting spaceport, and then from there into the payload bay of a dedicated interplanetary cruiser, okay, serviced on orbit. That's not how it's been done, and that's not how it's going to be done for a long time. And if we want to move the Mars mission from the realm of futuristic events that are beautiful to see in movies, okay, to the realm of what we can do, you've got to move it out of this parallel universe and into ours, into a simple lift and throw mission. And that's how we do it. So how can you do it, though? 120 tons to Leo. That interplanetary spaceship I showed you earlier weighed 800 tons. There's no way we're going to lift that to Leo in one lift and throw of a booster like this. Okay? Now, what can you do about it? Well, you can split it up into a number of chunks and throw them separately, and that'll reduce the size of each piece. But you can't go too far with that, because if you have a mission and you've got 10 launches in it, and each one's mission critical, and you lose one, you've lost the mission. You can split it in half. Okay, that would help. And there were also some things you could do with their trajectories that could have gotten the weight down a bit. But if you did those things, you'd still be down to at least 300 tons a chunk, well beyond the capability of this booster. Now, how can you get that down? Well, you can invoke advanced propulsion, nuclear propulsion, ion drive, antimatter. Okay. And some of that stuff might even work. But none of it is going to work on the timeline that is required to get the program before the water comes together. So what we proposed was to do the mission the Amundsen way. Reduce the mass you have to send to Mars by using the mass which is already there. Okay? And so that's how we do it. Next slide. So here's the mission sequence chart. And this is a chart that I drew in 1990. And there's some aggressive dates on there. They were aggressive in 1990, and have taken literally at this point, given what's transpired in the meantime, they'd be super aggressive. Okay? But the real point of these dates is not that I am predicting that we're going to fly the mission in these dates. It's certainly not a prediction. Or that these dates are particularly unique, because they're not unique of Mars opportunities. They're rather ordinary. Okay? The point that we're making with these dates is that, okay, though in 1990 we could have met these dates, is that you can't, this is a mission, this is a 20th century mission. This is a mission that can be done with 20th century technology by 20th century people. It's a mission that can be engineered by people who are engineers now, and flown by people who are in the astronaut corps today. Okay? And that's the point that we're making here. This is not a mission to be done by the people of the future. It's not to be done by Captain Kirk, Picard, etc. So, with that caveat, okay, I'll talk the chart, though, with the dates that I have on the chart. In a given year, in this chart, 1997, we launched one of these boosters off the Cape. And we used its upper stage to throw a 40-ton payload to Mars, with nobody in it. It's unmanned. It goes sailing out to Mars, and then it uses its aeroshell to capture into Mars orbit, and then it is landed on the surface of Mars with the help of a parachute, as we did in the Viking mission. Okay, now what is that payload? Okay, next chart, but keep this one aside. Okay, it consists of a number of things. The primary object would be a modest methane-oxygen-propelled Earth return vehicle. Okay, it has a small cabin, about 15 feet in diameter and 16 feet tall, so it has 2 decks, each with 8 feet of headroom. It's got 2 methane-oxygen chemical propulsion stages, which, however, are unfueled when it goes out to Mars. If they were filled with methane-oxygen, it would be much too heavy for us to throw to Mars with a vehicle in the class of the Ares. However, in the lower stage tanks that are later going to contain methane, in some of them, we have about 6 tons of liquid hydrogen, probably in gel form. And underneath the lander, they are not shown in this picture, it would be a methane-oxygen-driven light truck, like a little pickup truck. And in the back of the truck, there would be a small nuclear reactor, about 100 kilowatts of power. And when this is landed on Mars, the truck would be telerobotically driven a couple of 100 yards away from the landing site, and as it's driven, a cable will be unwound off the back of the truck. You drive the truck real slow, because there is, of course, a time lag and radio signals between Earth and Mars. But when you get it a certain distance away, you lower the reactor off the truck with the winch into a depression in the terrain, like a little crater or a ditch, or even you could blast a crater with a couple of sticks of dynamite, or just put it on the reverse side of the hill. Anything to put a nice sized chunk of dirt in between the reactor and the main landing area. Then you turn the reactor on, and next chart. And you go hunting. The Martian caribou, otherwise known as carbon dioxide. There's herds of it on Mars. It's all over the place. Okay, it's Mars's atmosphere. Every day of the week is 95% carbon dioxide gas. And you can catch it by running a roughing pump. Pumps capable of gathering Martian CO2 were first demonstrated by the English scientist Francis Hawksby in 1709. And we even have better pumps now.
NASA built.
So, okay, you acquire the CO2. Now, CO2 will react with hydrogen very easily in the presence of a catalyst, in particular nickel, and other catalysts are even better, in a reaction which is known as the Sabatier reaction. That is, hydrogen and CO2 will react to produce methane and water. This reaction has been practiced very broadly in the chemical industry since the 1890s. It's a very easy reaction to do. It's got an equilibrium constant of like 10 to the 9th, driving it to the right, and which means it goes to completion. And it's exothermic, so it requires no power to run. So basically, you can react away the hydrogen you brought from Earth into methane and water as fast as you can run the pump, which is very fast. In fact, you get rid of all your hydrogen into methane and water in 25 hours after you land. So there is no problem in trying to store cryogenic hydrogen on the Martian surface for a long period of time. Well, the methane that comes off the liquefying, you store that. That's your fuel for your Earth return. And the water that comes off, you condense, then you electrolyze it, another very old-fashioned chemical industrial technology, okay, to produce oxygen, which you store, and hydrogen, which you recycle to produce more methane and water. And you go round and round over there. And if you do this right, you also want to make some additional oxygen, which you do by breaking down, in a third reactor, breaking down CO2 into carbon monoxide, which you throw away, and oxygen, which you store. And when all is said and done, at the end of 5 months, you turn your 6 tons of hydrogen that you brought from Earth into 108 tons of methane oxygen on the surface of Mars. It's a leverage of 18 to 1. It's like being able to buy gasoline for a nickel a gallon, which is something I would like to do. Okay, or acquiring the useful mass of a caribou for the transported mass of a bullet and cartridge. Okay? That's what makes this mission work. 95% of our return fuel is coming from Mars. And more than that, we can make lots of additional oxygen, stockpile it on the surface, and use it to back up our life support system. So we don't really need a closed-loop life support system that is good for 2.5 years. Because for most of the mission, we're going to be on the surface of Mars, and there we have essentially an infinite supply of oxygen, so we can go open loop if we have to on the surface. Okay? And the oxygen can also be levered into water with hydrogen brought from Earth at 9 to 1. Okay? And the water can be used to leverage dehydrated foods into hydrated foods at about 3 to 1. Okay? And so on. And in addition, we produce about 12 tons of methane oxygen this way that we can use to power ground rovers. So this mission is not going to be limited to battery-powered golf carts. This mission is going to be able to use combustion-powered vehicles. We're going to be able to ride around on Mars on Jeeps. Okay? We're going to be able to go someplace because we're not going to Mars to set an altitude record for the aviation almanac. We're going there to explore. Okay? And you need mobility to explore. And there's no comparison between the power, range, and hauling capability and speed you can get with a combustion-powered vehicle compared to that which is possible with batteries or fuel cells. Okay? But if you want to use combustion vehicles, you can't do it with fuel brought from Earth. It would be much too expensive from a mass transportation point of view. But if you make your fuel, you can do it. So that's your dog sled. Okay? Not only does it get the in-situ propellant get you to Mars, it allows you to do something while you're there. Okay? Go back to the mission sequence chart. Okay. Took 8 months to fly to Mars, 5 months to make the propellant. That's 13 months. There's 18 months in between launch windows to Mars. So, there's 26 months between launch windows to Mars. Okay, so with the 8 and 5, that's 13. Okay, so in other words, the point is, long before the next window is opened up, you know that you have finished making the chemistry on Mars, and you have a fully fueled Earth return vehicle waiting for you on the Martian surface. So there's no question of getting stranded on Mars because in-situ propellant didn't work. It already has worked before you ever launch. Okay? And given that it has worked, at the next launch window, in this case 1999, you launch 2 more of these boosters off the Cape. One throws out another one of these Earth return vehicle fuel factory objects, and the other sends out a HAB with a crew of 4 astronauts in it. And they fly out to Mars on a 6-month trajectory. Next slide, keep this one. That's the hab. It's modeled on the bubbly tuna fish can, okay, which has been proven in commerce to be very effective volumetrically. Okay. But anyway, it's 27 feet in diameter, it's 16 feet tall. So we got, once again, 2 decks, each with 8 feet of headroom, but they're much bigger decks than on that Earth return vehicle. Next slide. This is the upper deck of the hab, a little stateroom for each of the 4 astronauts, a number of public areas for science, exercise, and so on, and a solar flare storm shelter in the center, okay, that you go into for the few hours of duration that a solar flare might be. It's quite cramped in there, but that's how we keep the mass down, just by shielding a small part of the ship instead of trying to shield the whole ship. The lower deck of the hab is kind of the garage workshop kind of place. Now the other thing you see about the hab is it's a really conventional kind of layout with furniture and stuff on the floor, even a sink. That's because it's designed for use in a gravity environment. On the way out to Mars, next slide, we can have artificial gravity just by tethering off the burnt out upper stage of the booster that threw us to Mars. There's a low-risk way to use tethers in space because you see the object at the far end of the tether is not mission critical. It's just the burnt out Ares upper stage. Because we're not flying out to Mars with all the mass required to fly back, the burnt out hulk of the throw stage is of comparable mass to the hab that it's throwing, and therefore it can be used effectively as a counterweight. Okay? You don't want to use tethered artificial G if that was, say, a fueled Earth return stage, because then if something went wrong with reeling in the tether, you'd be lost. Okay? In this case, if something goes wrong with the tether, you just cut it and continue the mission on a zero-G mode. Okay? And then this hab has artificial G on the way out to Mars, and as you'll see, we will land it on Mars when we get to Mars, and thus have natural gravity. Back to the mission sequence chart. Okay, so they fly out to Mars, they get there in 6 months, actually leading the second Earth return vehicle, so I misdrew this thing in that sense. But anyway, there's a fully fueled Earth return vehicle waiting for them on the surface. It's got a radar beacon to draw them down to it. We got a human pilot on board this thing, that's an ace. Okay, we got lots of photographs of the landing area from 2 years of robotic exploration on site. We should be able to land right on the spot. Absolutely precise landing should be possible. And I think a lot of people may remember that during Apollo even, we were able to land within 200 yards of a Surveyor spacecraft that had been put on the moon before. Okay? But if you're off course, you're okay by even tens or hundreds of miles, because we have with us below decks in the hab a pressurized ground roving vehicle running on methane oxygen combustion engines. It has a one-way driving range of 600 miles. So it would be pretty bad piloting, actually, to land outside the driving range of such a system. But if you did, you're still okay, because if you land on the wrong side of the planet, okay, you've got that second Earth return vehicle following you out to Mars, which could be brought down to land near you wherever you did land. Okay? And that one will be accurate because it'll be automated. Okay? So you'd be all right. Now, in that case, you would be depending upon propellant production to work, present tense instead of past tense. Okay, but this is a third-level mission backup, and the technology's already been proven by the first lander, and you've got humans on the scene to adjust the chemical synthesis equipment should it malfunction. So it's a pretty good third-level backup. And finally, a fourth-level backup. Okay, if all this fails, okay, the crew is on Mars. We've got natural gravity. We've got radiation protection offered by the Martian environment, and we got enough supplies with us to last 3 years. So that if everything fails, we just tough it out. Okay, for 3 years, well, actually for 2 years, until the next launch window opens up, okay, and more supplies and another Earth return vehicle can be sent out at that time. So you got a 4-layer defense in depth on the mission, and every single layer involves successfully carrying off the mission. It is a different mission philosophy than Apollo. In Apollo, the mission philosophy was an abort tree, i.e. cut and run. Okay? If anything goes wrong, quit and go home. That's nice and fine for the moon, but you can't do that at Mars. You are a lot farther away from home. You've got to be able to depend on yourself. Okay? And the use of the local resources basically creates a safe haven on Mars, and our mission strategy is to abort to success. Okay? Is carry out the mission. Okay? It's more like a military tactical plan with fallback options in it than an abortion. Okay? So that's how it works. But, okay, they go and they land at site number 1 with a fully fueled vehicle waiting for them. That works out fine. Then the second Earth return vehicle is landed somewhere else, site number 2. And it starts making propellant, which it will use to support the next manned mission, which flies out to it, along with another Earth return vehicle, which is their backup, which if they don't need it, can be used to open up site number 3, and so on. So the idea is that every 2 years, you'd be launching 2 boosters off the Cape. One to open up a new site, one to exploit the previously open site. 2 boosters every 2 years is an average of 1 per year to support a continuous program of human exploration of Mars. If we could launch these boosters at the same rate we launch shuttles, 6 a year, okay, that would represent 16% of our launch capability. It means that at the same time you're doing Mars, those boosters could also be flown to do lunar missions, asteroid missions, launch space stations, anything you want to do. Mars can be a measured part of an overall total space program, okay, with numerous objectives. And that's how it should be done. For any number of reasons. And I would say, furthermore, 1 booster per year to support Mars exploration absolutely is affordable and supportable. Okay? Absolutely. Okay, so, next slide. This is a depiction of what the base would look like on the surface. Maybe you could lift it up a little bit. Okay, there's the Earth return vehicle over there, the conical ship. The little methane oxygen production plant built into the landing stage, which serves as the takeoff pad when it takes off again, so that the in-situ propellant plant is a very small object, about the size of this thing, because we're really talking very small-scale chemical engineering. Don't think about making propellant on the moon and Mars like building chemical factories like Hooker Chemical and stuff like this. A lot of big tank farms and office buildings and parking lots and stuff. It's just a very small object. Makes the fuel, pumps it right up into the vehicle, and it's left behind on the surface when that takes off. The reactor in the crater in the background, the habitat up front, okay, some photovoltaics that you bring out with the HAB. If the HAB had landed away from the base, it would need its own source of life support power on the surface, so it brings out an auxiliary form of power, about 10 kilowatts worth. That gives it enough power to be on its own. Of course, if it lands at the base, you have very power-rich environments created by the reactor. But you set those things up anyway because they give you backup power if you want to turn the reactor off. Then you also have the ground rovers. There's actually 2 of them. Probably one of them is hard to see. There's the pressurized ground rover, about the size of a 4x4, gives a shirt sleeve environment. And it's designed basically for 2 astronauts for a period of about a week. Okay, and it can seat 4, though it would be pretty cramped. And then there is a unpressurized light utility truck that was used to deploy the reactor, and that's available as an emergency vehicle. For instance, if the crew that's out exploring in the rover were to get stranded, the other guys can come out in that and either tow them home or take them home or whatever. And then there is an experimental greenhouse here that's not a mission-critical object. It's an experiment in growing crops. And as the mission sequence proceeds, eventually we will actually integrate crops grown on Mars into the logistics. But for now, on the first mission, it's a learning project. Okay. Now, we made 12 tons of methane oxygen to support ground rover use. That gives us a total of 24,000 kilometers worth of traverse that we could do in that ground rover in the course of the 500 days we're on the surface. Now, to some people that may seem excessive. Why do you need that much? Well, 24,000 kilometers over 500 days is only 48 kilometers a day. It's 30 miles, 15 miles out and back. It is a moderate amount of driving. It is a moderate amount of mobility. And what you can see is that if we had an order of magnitude less than that, we would be crippled. The entire time we'd be on the surface of Mars, we'd be playing house. And that's not why we're going to Mars. Okay? So you've got to use the in-situ propellant, or you're not going to be able to do anything while you're on Mars. Okay? So that's how the mission works. 1.5 years on the surface. The initial priority is wide-ranging field exploration, which we're going to do initially for a couple of reasons. One is scientific, to resolve the question of whether there ever was life on Mars. Life Mars was once a warm and wet planet. We know that from water erosion features that are visible on the surface, and it was so apparently for a longer period of time than it took life to originate on Earth. So that if the theory is true, that life evolves wherever water-rich, favorable physical, chemical environments are available, then life should have originated on Mars, and we should at least be able to find fossils of it, if not extant life. And if you could do that, you would prove that life abounds in the universe, because you'd prove that it's a high probability event. On the other hand, if you widely explore Mars, if you do a serious job, but you find no evidence of life on Mars, past or present, then that's saying something else very different about the position of life in the universe. And either way, it could say that we're completely unique. And either way, it's a question of vast philosophical importance. It's one of the main intellectual questions facing humanity right now, and we'll resolve it. But we will also explore for resources. We will explore to try to find those areas on Mars that are suitable, the most suitable, to establish a permanent and larger scale human base. Next slide. This shows a sequence of missions. Each mission has a sortie range of 300 miles from the center of those circles are where the landing sites would be. They have those circles have a radius of 300 miles, and their centers are separated by 500 miles, so that within the course of a mission, you're on the surface 500 days, you have 24,000 kilometers worth of traverse. You can pretty much explore the interior of one of those circles, which, as you can see, is an area about the size of Texas. It's pretty substantial. Okay? And the centers are separated by 500 miles, so that which is within the one-way driving range of your ground transportation. So that what you could do is, let's say you're on mission number 6, okay, the one that actually has that shape of Texas in it, and you find that that region is really boring. There's absolutely nothing interesting in that region. So you decide you want to go somewhere else. Well, you get into your ground rover, and I see no one here is actually going to Texas.
It just went.
Okay, you can get in your ground rover and drive over to base number 5, live in the hab there, use some of the consumables that have been stored there, continue to explore region number 5, where perhaps there were many unsolved sites to be investigated, or meant to traverse over to region number 2 or 1. You've basically set up a string of outposts across Mars, just like in the American West, where forts existed at widely separated intervals and created the ability to operate over large regions of territory. Okay? But eventually, next slide, you're going to want to establish a larger base, because at a certain point, the question of Mars is no longer going to be, was there life on Mars? The question is going to be, will there be life on Mars? Okay? Mars has on it whether there ever was life on Mars or not. Okay? We know Mars has the resources to support life. Okay? And if microbes couldn't do it, we probably can. Okay? It's got the carbon dioxide. It's got water. There's enough water on Mars to cover that planet with an ocean several hundred meters deep. Okay? Mars is not like the moon in that respect. It's not arid. Okay? There's water. It's frozen in the ground in the form of permafrost, but there it is. Okay? It's got nitrogen as the minority constituent in the atmosphere. It has all the metals you could want in soil. The question is, can we bring to Mars the know-how required to extract them and make them usable? And to do that, we have to establish an engineering base with a larger number of people. Field exploration can be done by very small numbers of people, and probably is better done by small numbers of people. But to do engineering research, we need a lot more power, a lot more tools, we need a division of labor, we need a base. And the way we do that in this architecture is, after we've chosen the place to go, we just start landing a lot of these halves all in the same general area. And in second generation halves, you want to have some means of moving them together so you can mate them up, so you can go visiting each other without having to get all dressed up and stuff. So we have landing here on our second generation halves that can articulate not only up and down, but also somewhat side to side, thus allowing them to be walked short distances so they can be mated up in this way. Next slide. I disagree with those who think the moon is a stepping stone to Mars. I think it's a different direction altogether. But the moon is a very important place to go in its own terms, in my view, mostly as a platform for astronomy from which to explore the universe and make fundamental discoveries of physics, which we might be able to do with an optical interferometer on the moon. And the hardware that we use in Mars Direct can also be used, okay, to build a lunar base with many operational advantages for lunar operations of direct to the surface, direct return, so you don't leave anyone in orbit while you're on the moon a long period of time. And the methane oxygen engine is good to use to come back from the moon because it's a storable fuel for a long period of time, but when lunar oxygen is available, it can use it to large advantage, at which point this mode of operating actually saves mass compared to the lunar orbit rendezvous scheme that enabled Apollo. Although initially we bring all our fuel to the moon, and we do suffer a mass performance hit vis-a-vis a lunar orbit rendezvous scheme. It's got a permanent operational advantage and a downstream mass advantage, and it's got the advantage of commonality, and so we use it. Next slide. So that if you want to do the moon and Mars, this is the complete transportation system you need, using this sort of thinking. Okay? You have one heavy lift booster with a good throw stage, which is used to throw payloads to either the moon or Mars. Okay? There are no dedicated interplanetary spaceships. No spaceships like the movie in 2001. Okay? And I've got to emphasize that as attached to this concept as we all are, it's got to be understood that the paradigm of the big interplanetary battle cruiser, okay, is the key mental obstacle to the accomplishment of human missions to Mars in our lifetime. Okay? Because it is what takes the mission and takes it out of the realm of what we can do and puts it into a futuristic realm, which you will never get to unless you go through the intermediate step first. Okay? So no orbital infrastructure required to support it, and no futuristic vehicles. Just a throw stage, and then a HAB module that you would use on either the moon or Mars, although you have to insulate it differently because the thermal environment is very different on the moon and Mars. An Earth return vehicle that you use on either the moon or Mars, although the Martian one has the extra lower stage because it does a bigger amount of propulsion to come back direct from Mars than from the moon. And by the way, that thing is sized for a crew of 4 to come back from Mars in 6 months. It means it's also suitable for about a crew of 12 to come back from the moon in 3 days, so you can use it for large crew rotations in and out of a lunar base. And that's it. And an aeroshell that you use on Mars. You don't want to use it on the moon unless it's made someplace like West Virginia. But otherwise, you would not want to use an aeroshell on the moon. And that is your complete transportation system. And that is not a $400 billion program over there. It just isn't. Not in order of magnitude, it isn't. Okay? This is doable. Okay? Now, this program, this concept, was presented, as I say, first time in a closed audience right here at Marshall, okay, where it aroused a great deal of enthusiasm among those present, and then later, the National Space Society to the first public audience. And people know what happened there. Now, okay? Well, since that time, but it was 180 degrees out of sync with NASA's thinking at that time, which was the kind of thinking exemplified in 1984. Since that time, we've continued to present this. The Space Society has presented it in the magazine, and many individuals here have helped promote it, and it's gone up the ladder. Last June, I had the opportunity to brief Associate Administrator Michael Griffin on this concept, and that briefing went very well. And as a result, he had me go to Johnson Space Center and do an extended series of briefings to the mission planning group there, with his blessing behind it, so they would really pay attention. And they did. Okay, next slide. And I received this letter from Dan Golden a few months ago, okay, supporting Mars Direct. And some of you may know, in Los Angeles at the town meeting, somebody asked Golden about Mars Direct, and he gave a very lengthy and supportive answer where he explained the whole mission plan to the audience and said that this is the way you probably want to go to Mars. So he says here it's been incorporated into the new baseline, and indeed it has. The new Johnson Space Center Design Reference Mission is a modified version of Mars Direct. It's about 75% Mars Direct and 25% other things. It differs in some details, and it also differs in scale. They have a much larger scale mission than I do. It is a
chrome-plated.
It is chrome-plated, okay, or gold-plated, but at least they're getting something for the money. Rather than putting 800 tons in LEO to get 30 tons on the surface of Mars, which they had in the 90-day report, now they're getting 800 tons in LEO, but they're getting 250 tons on the surface of Mars. And they have at least a capable mission. At least now we're talking the same language. And now the issue is how big should it be? Okay? Instead of, we're not talking flags and footprints anymore. Okay? We're talking about going to Mars with a mission which is capable of being the wedge end of the human exploration of the settlement of Mars, not planting a flag. Okay? So, how much time do I have?
All day.
Can you wrap it up about 10 minutes?
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, because I know that I've hit 9 o'clock. All right. So, Mars Direct's had its impact. What happens next? Okay, next slide. Okay. Mars Direct is the minimal program to get going a significant capability on the surface of Mars. And as I say, we can build an engineering base on the surface of Mars in modular form, okay, to establish those technologies needed to establish human settlements on Mars. Now, if you upgrade the transportation system a bit, by adding actually a nuclear thermal throw stage to a vehicle like the Ares, we can double what it can throw to Mars. Okay? Don't think that because we use chemical propulsion in Mars Direct that I am against nuclear propulsion. I am not. Okay? I am a vehement advocate of nuclear thermal propulsion. Okay? But the way you've got to approach technology is to develop it as fast as you can and bring it into the mission as soon as it's available, but not hold up the mission until you have some futuristic technology. Okay. But when we have it, we'll be able to throw twice as much to Mars. Okay, and instead of throwing 47 tons to Mars, we can throw about 80 tons to Mars with this vehicle. And with it, okay, if you're just going one way to Mars, this vehicle can actually house 24 people on a 6-month transit, one way to Mars. Okay, assuming that the logistics are available at Mars to support them once they're there. Okay, and it also, once it's landed on Mars, that shape over there would be a habitat that could support them, provided the consumables were being produced on Mars. Okay, now let's say you launched 4 of these a year. Okay, from the Earth. Okay, it could be 4 from the United States, or maybe 1 from the United States and 3 from Serbia. You know, it depends how things go. But in any case, the U.S. alone, frankly, would be capable of launching an average of 4 of these a year if we were serious about it. And certainly in international collaboration, you could do that as well. Let's say that's what you did. Next slide. Well, you can put together a computer. That would be immigration rate to Mars of about 100 people a year. And then if you write a computer program and take into account various demographic assumptions that are sort of typical, okay, you can predict the population growth on the surface of Mars. And now this particular chart is assuming that this immigration is beginning in 2010. And what you would see is that 40 years after the initiation of this settlement program, you'd have 10,000 people on Mars, okay, a third of whom are under 19 years old, which is to say they are natives. Okay? And 100 years after the beginning of the program, you'd have 80,000 people on Mars. Next slide. And if you were to compare this to the rate of population growth that actually occurred in colonial America in the 17th and 18th centuries, okay, this is what you get. That is, the Martian rate is a bit slower, okay, but in the larger scheme of things, they go in the same place in comparable periods of time. So what I'm saying here, okay, now, admittedly, this is a myopic analysis. This looks at the problem strictly from the standpoint of transportation. But the point I'm making here is that from the point of view of transportation, there is not a problem with settling Mars in the 21st century at a rate comparable to that which colonial America was settled. The issue is not transportation. We don't need to invoke super advanced forms of interplanetary transportation to settle Mars. What you need to invoke is the ability to support people once they get to Mars. See, whether or not there are resources in an environment that you're going to depends upon what you bring to the environment. The ingenuity, the know-how, the technology that you bring to that environment determines whether that environment for you is a desert or a Garden of Eden. Okay? So if we go to Mars with this kind of engineering base that I'm talking about here, and we start experimenting with how you do things on Mars, how you not merely take this first step of making fuels, which is sort of the hunter-gatherer level of dealing with Mars, but you grow crops on Mars, yes, you make bricks, you make ceramics, you make plastics, you make metals, you make wires, you make habitats. Okay? You can master those, then in fact you can settle Mars. Okay? And that's it. The American West was once called the Great American Desert. It may seem odd, especially to those of us who actually live in the West. I live in Colorado, though I'm not originally from there. But, you know, people thought this was a desert. Now, yes, it had 10 inches of rainfall, which is much less than people in the East were used to. But when they brought to it the techniques that allowed it to be lived, all of a sudden it's reconceived, and it is no longer a desert. The same way as to Franklin's men, the Arctic was a desert, whereas to Eskimos and people willing to learn from the Eskimos like Allison, the Arctic has the ability to support humans and life and civilization. Okay? So, beyond this, where does it go? Next slide. Here's where it goes. Okay? There's water on Mars. There's lots of CO2 on Mars. Okay? There's only 1% of Earth's atmospheric thickness in its air, but there's enough CO2 in Mars' soil. If you can outgas it, you can outgas it by raising the temperature of the place, and it will add to the temperature increase as you make it outgas, to create an atmosphere on Mars with a pressure between 1/3 and 1/2 that of Earth. Okay, now that's a CO2 atmosphere, admittedly, but if you had that much pressure on Mars, 5, 6, 7 psi, you would not need spacesuits on Mars anymore. You could walk around on Mars in street clothes, provided you had oxygen breathing gear. But more importantly, and you could grow plants in the open on Mars, because there'd be plenty of radiation protection from an atmosphere that thick, and there'd be liquid water because it would be warm, and that permafrost would start to melt out on you. Okay? But you could, you know the big dome cities of science fiction? Well, they are science fiction so long as they're in a vacuum environment, because the pressure difference across a dome like that would blow it to pieces. But if you had outside pressure, in this case of CO2 gas, then you could indeed make huge inflatable structures, city-sized structures, okay, like the huge tents that they have various, like, play tennis in, or various large sports arenas in, supported by air pressure. You could build those on Mars, and you could indeed, people would not be living in tuna cans on Mars for that long. And the kind of outgassing that is required to create this kind of pressure can probably be done by producing greenhouse gases on Mars at a scale that will be doable in the late 21st century. And we can indeed start recovering Mars as a fully habitable planet. So, to round it out, I'll conclude with a quote. Some people have known I've used this quote before. I really like it. This is a quote that I drew from a book called Plymouth Plantation, written by William Bradford, who was the leader of the Pilgrims. And what he's talking about here is the debate that erupted among the Pilgrims when they were in Holland, and they didn't like the way things were going. And they didn't know what to do about it. And so somebody came up with a totally bizarre suggestion that what they ought to do about it was relocate the entire congregation from the civilized Netherlands into the wilds of North America. Because if they went to North America, then they could make their own world, okay, instead of having to inhabit one that's defined by others. Okay? And he says, this proposition, being made public and coming to the scanning of all, it raised many variable opinions amongst men, and caused many fears and doubts amongst themselves. Some, from their reasons and hopes conceived, labored to stir up and encourage the rest to undertake and prosecute the same. Others, again, out of their fears, objected against it, and sought to divert from it, alleging many things, and those neither unreasonable nor unprobable, as that it was a great design, and subject to many unconceivable perils and dangers. It was answered that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties, and must be both enterprised and overcome with answerable courages. And I put that up there because, see, look, it's got to be understood, okay? Going to Mars is going to be risky. Okay? It's going to be risky whether you go in 1999 with a plan like I proposed, or whether you go in 2099 for the first time, or we leave it to the far future to do. The first people to go to Mars are going to have to face risks. Okay? You know, I put a lot of backups in my plan. I have, you know, you can rendezvous this way and that way, and we have a storm shelter and an artificial G and all this great stuff. But there is no doubt that this is not an enterprise for the faint-hearted. Okay? But if you look at human history, okay, is one thing is extremely clear. Okay? And it doesn't matter whether you look at what happened 300 years ago, or what you look at 50 years ago, or 25 years ago. Okay, is one thing is totally clear, is that nothing great has ever been accomplished without courage. Thanks. We've got time for just a couple of questions. Yes?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the budgetary and political Red Sea has closed on going to Mars for the time being. How could you apply this technology on something that's likely to be approved in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, look, 5, 10 years, hey, the next election is only 3 years away now.
I don't think the budget's going to be balanced in 3 years either.
Okay, well, there are smaller scale missions. You could do a smaller scale version of this as a Mars sample return, for example, which would prove the technology, bring back a big science return, and could be done for the kind of money that unmanned missions cost. Okay, and that's certainly a possibility. Okay, and it's one very much worth thinking about. Okay, so I don't want to discount it. But also, I do want to make clear that what I just said was not a flippant remark. Okay, that is, we are more powerful than the people who appear to have power in Washington. And the reason why we are more powerful than people who currently command budgets and armies is because we are going to be around when they are gone.
Yeah.
You know, Democrats trashed out SEI saying, oh, this is Danny Quayle's little thing. But everybody here knows that humans to the moon and Mars didn't come from Dan Quayle. Okay? Okay? It's an idea that penetrated into the political system and which he as a person happened to pick up, but it came from the people who've been carrying the torch. Okay? If we keep carrying the torch, the idea will be picked up again. We learned some lessons from the failure of the SEI. Okay? We sat back for too long. We thought that because we had a presidential mandate launching this thing, we could sit back, and we didn't really go into action with our SEI petition until the 11th hour, when the program was virtually in the sink. But next time, we won't make that same mistake. We better not. Okay? We can at least learn from history. Okay? And we keep growing the constituency in the public that supports this sort of thing, and next time we mobilize it, we can do it. But as I say, 3 years. Other question? Over here.
How difficult do you think it really might be to make all the fuel and the methane and the chemicals on the Martian surface, seeing that the air pressure is only, what, about 1% of the Earth, and there's dust storms and crud in the air and stuff like that?
I really don't think it's that difficult. What you do is you run a pump, and you compress the CO2. You compress it through a filter to filter out the dust. Okay? And you bring it to about 100 psi into a holding tank. At that pressure, at the temperatures on Mars, CO2 will liquefy. And any dust that managed to get through the filter will go down to the bottom of the tank. And then you take, and things that won't liquefy, like nitrogen and argon, which aren't particularly much of a pest anyway, will just off gas. Then off of that liquid reservoir, you take CO2, and that will be pure distilled CO2. It's essentially the same way as you desalinate seawater. Okay? And once you have pure CO2, then you can have designed for it a piece of chemical equipment that you know will work. In other words, once you know that your feedstock is what you want it to be, then the entire armament of terrestrial chemical engineering can come to bear on handling that and making sure. And this is a process, by the way. unlike most things in the manned-Mars mission, like an aero brake or a Mars parachute, so this is something you can test on Earth. We can put it in a Mars simulation chamber, and we can test it ad infinitum. We can test it under very adverse, artificially difficult conditions, and we can test it and so forth until we know we've got something that'll work. And you give it the appropriate level of redundancy and so forth. And from a technology point of view, it's a lower level of technology than everything else in the mission, literally. I mean, it's 19th century technology we're talking here. So while in one sense it's very innovative, okay, most mission plans haven't done this sort of thing in the past, in another respect, this is a very conservative approach. We're invoking as our critical technology something that was available in Jules Verne's time. I'll take one last, and then I'll go out into the hall and answer any further questions there.
Last year, there was a NASA gentleman was working on another program, and I got a comment from him to the effect that this wouldn't work because Mars' atmosphere thickness varies by a factor of 2, and that you couldn't count on the aero brake. Could you address that? It was so far outside that what I've heard, it just didn't make any sense.
Well, he's wrong. Mars' atmosphere thickness does vary by about 25% over a year. What you do is you design your aero brake so that your minimum density altitude, say, is something which, when Mars' atmosphere is thin, is 10 kilometers above the Martian surface, and when Mars' atmosphere is thick, is 15 kilometers above the Martian surface. And what you do then, and the density variation of the Martian atmosphere is predictable. It's a seasonal thing. It's not something that one day it's this and another day it's that. It gets thicker when Mars moves to the periapsis. Mars has got an elliptical orbit. The planet gets warmer, and more of the CO2 from the polar cap is evaporated. Okay, so you know what the atmosphere of Mars is on a seasonal basis. We got very good data from that on 5G. And you target your altitude to correspond to that. Okay, so the variation in Mars' atmosphere is not at all a showstopper to aero capture at Mars. It just has to be taken into account to the mission design. Thanks a lot.
Coming and speaking to us this morning. Well, we will have heck with that. We'll have a few closing remarks here, and then we'll get on to the other sessions. There's quite a few speakers waiting and raring to go here this morning. What I wanted to say before I left here is that, before you all leave here, is that your smiling faces and your compliments have made it all worth it. We've appreciated that. And I just wanted to add the idea that you can make a difference. You can make a difference in a lot of different ways, but I'll point out a couple of quick examples. Back in 1981, the O5 Society, one of our parent organizations, formed a phone tree. The O5 Society only had about 5,000 people. So the phone tree was some subset of that. But the interesting thing is the first phone tree alert that we had to call for political response to an event was when David Stockman, brand new budget director at the Office of Management and Budget for Ronald Reagan's new administration, decided that, hey, we only need to complete these 2 orbiters, which are essentially completed, and let's not build the rest of them. Well, we hadn't been in space for almost 6 years when this occurred. And we as a society said, whoa, wait a minute, are we not going to have a manned space program? We're just going to believe it. So we responded by calling the White House. And we sent a lot of calls in. But the response was that Ronald Reagan went straight to David Stockman and said, put that money back in. He personally directed him to do that. And somebody was in the White House counting phone calls, and there was a delta on, in the budget that we could measure. And one of the later issues, the L5 News gave a breakdown that, if I recall right, was something like $140,000 for every phone call made. I thought, well, my God, that'll pay an engineer and a secretary and corporate overhead for almost a whole year. And it only took a minute or two with a phone call. That impressed me quite a bit. But there have been many other events that have impressed me quite a bit. And that really does underlie and point out that you can make a difference. You can found the future, and I know you are the kind of people that will do that. Before I bring on the next speaker, I'd like to point out what the other sessions are this morning. Over in Heritage Room 1, Woodcock is over there waiting and ready to go to talk about what to do with the demise of SEI. In this room, we're going to look at what some founders of the future are doing. We're going to have a session called Wild Cards. It's going to show us some of the outcome of this foundry, which was ran on the past couple of days. In the room next door, we're going to look at some more interesting technological options for space transportation, which employ the use of tether technology. But we have somebody else that wants to say a few closing remarks about this event, and that's our president of the National Space Society, Mr. Charlie Walker, and you know well by now that he is a three-time payload specialist on the space shuttle, flew for McDonnell Douglas doing the electrophoresis experiments. Mr. Walker is currently Senior Manager for Space Programs Development at McDonnell Douglas Space Systems Company. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Charlie Walker.
Great, thanks very much. And actually, I want to see the session get on like you do, where we've once again heard Dr. Zubrin give us well, what do you say? I mean, stimulating was a fair representation, I think, and a wonderful representation of what can happen, what you all can help make happen. You heard me at lunch yesterday say, and I'll repeat it again here, that we certainly know how we're going to do these things. Now we have to convince those around us that the why is also there, and the why will bring them along with us. Now you guys get the first seats, of course. We'll let them help pay the bill. But you've got to help explain the why. Why, in fact, another world is worth building, and what it means to have perhaps a comfortable home, the cradle of humanity, remain a comfortable home, while in fact we start building other homes, new worlds out there. But that's the kind of future, that's the kind of why that we need to be working on. I was very stimulated by that. Think about it. I want to hear what kind of wild cards we've come up with out of the foundry, what we're going to continue to work with. Hope to see you at the town meeting in a couple hours' time. Thank you.